Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a first look at the Sony FX3. Now, I just received my review unit from Sony, and I'm really excited about this camera. And that's because it quite possibly is the next camera I'll be using here on the channel, creating content for all of you. Now, it retails for a little under $4,000 US, $38.98 to be exact, currently out of stock. And a lot of people, when this was announced, simply dismissed it and said, you know, the A7S III is the better camera because basically this is an A7S III repackaged, rebranded. And I understand where those thoughts come from. It has the same sensor, much of, if not exactly the same overall video performance. But one thing is really clear. This camera is designed to be a cinema camera. Even if its form factor doesn't remind you of a cinema camera because it is really compact, it is a cinema camera, no question about it. You've got 1/4-20 mounts all around the body, and which means you don't really need a cage, which is something I already know is going to appeal to me personally, because while cages are really functional and have their place, obviously, part of keeping a camera like this compact is knowing you don't need one. The other game changer on this camera, again pointing to it to be simply a video camera at heart, is the heatsink. We have active cooling on this camera. The A7S III, that doesn't exist. Now, I'm not here to tell you that the A7S III overheats all the time, because for the majority of users it doesn't. But with this camera, I anticipate zero overheating. Now, you may have noticed there's no EVF. That's another big critique of this camera. Unlike the A7S III, which has a fantastic EVF, you don't have that here. But you do still have the flip-out display. I can tell you right now, I do wish this display was larger, but it is touchscreen. It has the new menu system, and that, for me, probably is going to be enough. But that's not really what I'm after. In all likelihood, I'll be using an external monitor, and that's, again, the beauty of all of the mounting points on this camera. And the build quality is just excellent. So, again, the A7S III comparisons are rampant, they're inherent, but to me, they are very similar, yet very different in terms of who they're going to directly appeal to. Another thing I really like about this camera, the tally lights, the record button on the front, that giant record button on the top of the body, and really just that it is cinema-centric. Another cinema camera that I'm presently reviewing that I really like is Sigma's FPL. Now, that's a hybrid. The FPL, of course, a full-frame, mirrorless cinema camera that's even smaller than this, but also happens to shoot over 60 megapixel stills. You're not getting that here. But what you are getting from Sony, of course, is the autofocus system that is right now best in class. Now, another element of this camera that is, of course, worth mentioning is the included Xlr capability. So if you plan on using XLR microphones, this is yet another must-have. Now, of course, you can add this with an A7S III, but Sony clearly identifying that if they're going to market the FX3 as a cinema camera, then it has to have the cinema features you expect. So again, we've got that same 12 megapixel sensor from the A7S III, the ability to capture 4K at up to 120 frames per second, 1080p at up to 240 frames per second. So 10-bit 422, obviously, 16-bit raw output, and that's another nice thing when it comes to the actual ports, and hopefully most of you aren't freaking out with this. I'm not in a dust-free lab, but don't worry, I have a blower and this will be cleaned out. In terms of ports, we have a full-size HDMI port, which is the way it should be. And then on the other ports here, we have what you already expect in terms of Type-C, a micro USB, which is Sony's multi, which still works. I mean, I've got, accessories that are over a decade old that sync up and work with this. So while I could always say, Sony, when are you going to give up on good old micro USB? that little legacy there isn't a bad thing, I have to say. It makes its way back into every product. Headphone, microphone jack, again, if you're not interested in using the XLR options, Sony making sure to cover all of its bases. And then when it comes to the actual battery, you're dealing with a Type Z. Now, I have a generic in there. Of course, that's not what Sony included. They included the real deal, but I've already been burning through some of the batteries just in testing initially. And again, this is just a first look, but so far, I'm really impressed with what Sony did here. I mean, years ago, Sony basically gave us a small preview and told us in the future we would have 4K cinema cameras in this capacity, and they looked a lot like this. They were boxy, unfinished. Well, now we have the finished product. And again, I think that anyone who dismisses the FX3 in favor of the A7S III could in turn be doing themselves a disservice, because the reality of this camera, I think, is more to the effect of that if people had had the option when the A7S III launched to go with this instead, I think a lot of people would have gone for this. Now, it's not a perfect camera. I already know that. The lens that I asked for Sony, well, I asked for 2 lenses to send over to review in tandem with this, is this bad boy right here, which is a beautiful piece of glass. This is their, of course, full frame C16-35, and it is a monster, but boy, will it achieve what you're looking to do if this is the range and you want a power zoom to just, again, create more dynamic content. I know a lot of people will say power zooms don't have a place in video and cinematography, and that's nonsense. If you have more flexibility, as long as you're not giving up optical quality, it's always a good thing. So I already have the PZ 28-135, but of course that doesn't get quite wide enough, and that's where this piece of glass comes in. And I'm afraid with this little kit here that I am going to be in love. And if you're wondering, why no body cap, why no cap here, it's because I already have obviously shot a little bit with it. And so far, I'm really impressed. And just to show you, on camera what this looks like, it's a beast, okay? This is not a light pairing. There's no question about it. But it is really, I think, one of the best that you could possibly go with. And that's why when I was asked, what lens would I like to pair with this camera, I already knew that I had the kit Cinema lens that I just mentioned before. It was a matter of what else would I add to this specific FX3 if I were to purchase it. And this 16-35 is really, in my opinion, the lens to have. Now, of course, it's pretty big on it. You can go with any Sony G Master lens and get great fidelity out of this cinema camera. I also will be testing it with some G Master glass as well, but and also some non-G Master stuff just to see how it performs. But again, this is all about having a dedicated cinema camera in a tiny form factor that's going to give you possibilities and creative options that you wouldn't get out of its bigger brothers that are not just more expensive, but much larger, like the FX6. So really excited about this. Again, I've only spent a little bit of time with it, but the thing, again, that I will say, the one thing I wish that Sony, this I can already say on a first look, I do wish this display was larger. I feel like this is a problem, not a problem, but an issue that Sony needs to address across the entire lineup of cameras, not just this, but the A7 series, that once they do, things are going to be very different, because it's just, when you look at a camera like this, I'm trying to get this back on the hot shoe here, because that is how this mounts, and then you, of course, just tighten up the screws. I just feel like we're missing the mark on the size of the display across the entire Alpha line of cameras right now. I feel like we're still stuck years past, and it's time for a revamp. And this camera, of all of them, granted, size would be part of the trade-off, would be one of the best examples, in my opinion, to get a larger display. Even though most will argue, again, that you will use an external monitor, myself included, I will be with this through the course of my testing. Still, if you ever want to do any run and gun, this is just a tiny display on a camera with amazing capability that I think just gets hampered here. So overall, again, really impressed with the build quality, like what I'm seeing so far, love basically all of the function. Battery life is what I'm going to be interested to see, you know, how well it actually does there. I already had it in the on position in case anybody missed that. But we're going to see. You can see battery exhausted. I make my point. And that is an issue. And I'm going to pop this out and put in a fresh one soon. But overall, really excited about this camera. Really excited about this lens. Links are in the description if you want to try to find one. Again, this is pretty much sold out everywhere. The lens, of course, has availability. It is a $6,000 piece of glass, but really impressive combo, and just happy to be able to share it with all of you, because as soon as Sony announced this, I knew that it was likely what I was waiting for, whereas the A7S III, a great camera, I reviewed it already, really versatile, but still a hybrid at the end of the day. This clearly is aimed at being a video camera, since it is in the Cinema line. Even though some, you know, I don't want to call you snobs, but some of you out there will dismiss it because of its form factor. I, on the other hand, will do no such thing. So first look, a little bit of a rant because I am very excited about this camera. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe, and please stay safe. Later.